Thank you for joining us today for a special conversation with Cort Hrivnak discussing technology. Nothing is ever all good or all bad. So you should know that Cort has been a practitioner here at Starting Point for how many years, Cort?
Since 2012.
There you go. So he's been around for a while. By the way, he also is a great golfer. He usually joins my
Yes.
foursome for the golf tournament. But he also spent 10 years in information technology before returning to his original love of counseling. I think something on his bio on the website really struck me. So I'm going to read it if you don't mind. And it is, Cort helps its clients break unhealthy and unhelpful patterns in their lives. He believes that being stuck is often due to being caught in a stagnant cycle where thoughts, actions, and feelings reinforce each other in ways that prevent a person from moving in the direction they want in their lives. Cort assists clients in discovering which part of the cycle is most accessible to them and then helps them focus their efforts in changing that part of the cycle in order to promote positive results in other areas. I think we can all sort of relate to needing help in those areas. So Cort is a very special practitioner here, and we love having him sit in for Vince today. So
Thank you.
Cort, let's jump right in there, but let's sort
Sure,
of
sure.
take advantage of your experience. How has technology shaped our world and even our economy at this point?
Sure. So I think, probably a better way to frame the question, or at least look at it, is really how has technology not affected our world, right? So technology in the broadest sense of the word is, or of the word, is really anything, any tool that we use to change the world around us, right? And so, we've been using, as Homo sapiens, we've been using technology, since we were cavemen. You know what I mean? Sort of the first piece of technology was sort of us using a stick, you know what I mean, to do something else, to knock fruit down from a tree, or to, somehow manipulate it, into doing other things. And that's, it's interesting because in studies on crows, black crows, in terms of trying to infer intelligence, what animals are intelligent, and how conscious they are, the use of tools is one of the big, is like one of the first stepping stones. But regardless, so I mean, I think technology has been around as long as we have. And with that, like, I'm a huge fan of technology. I'm pretty much a fan of all technologies that comes from not only my professional background, but sort of just my philosophy as well. However, I think it's important, and I think we're all well aware of this, that technology always has a good and bad side to it. You know what I mean? Technology itself is neutral. So, be it computers, be it the discovery of fire, all those sorts of things, they're neutral in value on their own. However, it's what we decide to use or not use them for that turns them into good or not good things. And then on top of that, as new technologies emerge, we don't yet possess the skills and the discipline to know how to correctly use them. So, like, if we want to think of fire as one of the first major emerging technologies, like, yes, it was wonderful because you could cook your food, which meant, you would be healthier longer, like, because food has better value when it's cooked than when it's raw. Um, but you could also, like, burn the forest down if you didn't take care of it. You know what I mean? And to say nothing of the fact that you could use it to hurt other people or hurt other animals and things like that. And so the first people who discovered fire had to figure out, all right, what is the correct use of this thing? And more importantly, what do we need to do as people internally in order to use it correctly? And I know we're going to get around to social media in particular a little bit later, but I think that's kind of where we are with social media. I think overwhelmingly it's a good thing, but we have not yet, because it's so new, we have not yet developed the skills of how do we use it correctly. You know what I
I
mean? And
love
how do we
that. And
avoid receiving?
I love that
Yeah,
analogy of fire because you get it.
yeah,
It has good sides and it has bad sides. But
yes,
we couldn't get
absolutely.
along without it today.
Correct, correct. And I think, that's a big thing. So I mean, economically, I think, yeah, I mean, the world is a much smaller place, in terms of just computers. Like technology for us right now is really in two big areas. So there's electronics, which is sort of, is important, but is starting to be supplanted by, let's say, biological technology. So things like, DNA manipulation and, trying to cure diseases based on that level as opposed to just medication. So, human society is always moving forward for better and for worse. So it's
Even
going
if
to, it's,
we go along kicking and screaming, right?
yes. And I mean, for me, it's an exciting time, to be alive. You know what I mean? Like we're seeing things done now that we could only imagine, doing, you know, 50 years ago. So it's very exciting.
A lot of people talk about that the shutdowns with COVID that we're still
Sure.
recovering. But the other side of it is, could we have done the shutdowns if it wasn't for technology?
Sure. I think, you know what, it's a great question. Like, I think it would have been immeasurably worse if we did not have it. I mean, and so the technology that we're all using right now, Zoom. So Zoom was around before COVID, but your business people in certain environments knew it existed because they were video conferencing and stuff. Even as far back in the '90s and things. But your normal member of the public had no idea that it existed, or you know what I mean, didn't use it. Let's put it that way. So, you know, COVID, our technology allowed us, many people, to work from home, you know what I mean, without disrupting their economic income, you know what I mean? And it allowed for work still to be done. On the other side, it did expose, and, because there were people that were still hurt by the shutdown, that, technology, in terms of its benefits, are not evenly distributed in all career fields. So your nurses and your doctors and your, sort of like your frontline workers, even in terms of people working at supermarkets and stores, those people still needed to be there. You know what I mean? And the technology didn't help them as much as it did, you know, your office workers or people who could do things, without having to be hands on. So
So, okay, so then we appreciate that technology has allowed us to do things better and faster, um, and have all kinds of information at our fingertips. In fact, I wish I was in high school now instead of having to
right.
look up every word I couldn't spell and having to use the World Book Encyclopedia that was always 20 years behind
Right.
the information that I needed for my papers.
Sure.
Um, but what's the cost? And I don't mean dollars and cents, but what's the
Sure.
cost on our psyche?
Well, it is like, it's interesting. Like I often talk to my clients about the idea that, let's say 40 years ago, if you were having a dinner party with people, and you were sitting around the table after dinner and you were just talking about something random, and you were talking about, let's say, a movie someone had seen, 10, 15 years ago, and you're trying to remember who the actor or actress was, and people have to go off memory, right? Because there's nowhere, 50 years ago, there's nowhere you can get that information during that conversation. But right now, anyone at any time can take out their cell phone, can take out their smartphone and find the answer to an answer, not always the right one, right? But an answer to any question pretty much at any time. You know what I mean? So in that aspect, it's been very positive. But the cost is a very important thing. Um, I don't think, one of the things with cell phone technology in particular is you can never escape it. You know what I mean? Like you can always be reached. And while initially that seems like a good thing, but I think what many people have found is that they don't have any alone time. And it's not always people reaching out to bother you. It's also dealing with our own tendency to reach out, and for lack of a better word, waste our time doing things that we would rather not do. You know what I mean? Or that aren't necessary. You know what I mean? So you find yourself, I think we've all gone down the rabbit hole of YouTube or just the internet in general, where you end up searching for one thing and then 4 hours later, you know what I mean, you're reading about ancient Egyptian archaeology, you know what I mean, in 2000 BC, and you have no idea how you got there. And it's good from an information standpoint, but it's bad in that you probably wasted that time. And that technology, electronic technology, does have an impact on our brain and like our neurobiology. That's not always a positive thing. I think many adults now find themselves wondering if they have ADHD, but sort of onset, like they never experienced it as a child. um, but now all of a sudden they find themselves, in their 30s, 40s, 60s, 70s, not being able to focus, and always wanting to look for the next thing. And I think that's far more likely to be the fact that we're being conditioned by our technology rather than, let's say, an actual change in our mental abilities. So I mean, there are substantial costs. You know what I
Can
mean?
I
And
get, can I interrupt you for a second? Because you were
yeah.
talking about focus. As
Hmm.
we all age, I know we're always worried about how forgetful we are.
Right.
What I just heard you say is some of that might not be age, that actually might be the screen time.
I feel it really is because, like, here's the thing, like, we all have sort of impulses, right? Where things just pop into our mind. And 50 years ago, using that dinner analogy, when you're talking about the actor, who was the actor in this part, you might have that impulse 50 years ago to wonder about it, but because you couldn't get the answer, that question had to end there. You know what I mean? Like, you'd have to get up and go to the library or call
Right.
somebody who was, your friend who knew all movies, right? So you weren't able to scratch that itch right away. But now you can do it in seconds. You know what I mean? And there's nothing other than our own self-discipline standing in the way of that. So, you know, and the more we feed those scattered thoughts, the more likely they are to reoccur. You know what I mean? Because our brain is is hungry. You know what I mean? And it always wants more. It always wants more information. Um, because that's just kind of how we've grown accustomed to. Paying attention to our environment is important. When we lived out in the woods, you needed to. You needed to pay attention to sounds and smells and things that just seem different. You know what I mean? Because that could really threaten your ability to continue to exist. And so what it's kind of morphed into now is we get all these little, essentially unimportant, interesting but unimportant questions that come to our mind. And because we can find the answer in 10 seconds, you know, we do that. And so I think it works against our ability to focus.
Is there a way that we can retard those impulses? I'm not going to say get rid of them because
Right.
curiosity is part of us, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it is a good thing in measured amounts, right? I mean, what it comes down to is for people, let's say, for people in their 20s and older, it's going to come down to self-imposed discipline. You know what I mean? Which is many people are actually starting to sleep with their cell phones downstairs. Do you know what I mean? So, like, when you go upstairs and you decide to go to bed, the novelty initially of having a cell phone was really exciting, that you could have it next to your bed all the time. So that if, heaven forbid, something happens at night, somebody gets sick, somebody goes into the hospital, the phone's right there, right? But what many younger people are finding now is that it's so disruptive to their life. What they do is they've disciplined themselves to leave the phone, let's say, on the, hallway table downstairs or outside of their bedroom, and then they go to bed. And it's inconvenient, of course, if the phone rings in the middle of the night. But the upside of that for them is better sleep. You know what I mean? And time away from technology. So, yeah, I think, unfortunately, and it really comes down to becoming aware of it and then figuring out how do you need to outsmart yourself, you know what I mean, in order to keep the technology in its proper place,
Okay.
you know.
So, does the frequent use of digital technology interfere with emotional and social intelligence?
I think it certainly does. And I think in terms of technology, it's important to distinguish between, let's say, types of technology. So they did I think it was Einstein's brain, and I forget, I think he played the violin. And so what they did is when he died, not because, they took his brain, you know what I mean? And they studied it, not because they were interested in his violin playing, but because, we were trying to figure out, they thought they could figure out what made Einstein so smart. Why was his brain so different than others? But they noticed that there was more gray matter in a particular area of his brain that they figured out corresponded to music, like him playing music, and people who play piano for their whole life, or for significant parts of their life, their brain develops in particular areas that other people's do not, who do not play music, right? So I think that I'm pretty certain that technology also has that same effect. Our brain doesn't distinguish between what we feed it. It just tries to become better and, you know, become better at whatever we do give it. You know what I mean? So, yes, I mean, it certainly influences how our brain develops in terms of, but the type of technology is important. So I think social media has very much a mixed impact, and it trends more towards the negative because I don't think we've really figured out how to use it. Computer gaming, on the other hand, for example, used to be viewed, in the 80s and 90s as kind of like an undesirable thing, where you had, where the stereotype was of some kid, who stayed inside all day in their basement and just played, on their computer and, wasn't able to handle social situations, wasn't able to handle the world, that they were hiding away. That's really changed a lot, I would say, in the last 15, 20 years. Kids who are growing up now, everybody plays video games, and those video games are really overwhelmingly social. So kids don't, there's, in computer gaming technology, there's like single player games where you're just playing on your own. And then there's other types of games where you're playing with real other people who are not located in the same room as you, but are somewhere else. And children use that overwhelmingly for socialization these days. Um, it's interesting. So, country, South Korea, 85%, it's somewhere between 80 and 85% of South Koreans play what they call massively multiplayer online games. And when I'm saying like 80%, we're not just talking 80% of kids, we're talking from everybody. You know what I mean? So from birth, well, not birth, obviously, but from a certain age in
Not
childhood.
yet, anyway.
Yeah, exactly. All the way up until, they're on their deathbed, sort of thing. 80% of that country in general plays online games. And it's a very social experience. So in that respect, technology, that expression of technology can actually help social development and emotional IQ because a lot of these games are team building and doing things that you could not do on your own. Um,
Kurt, one
yep.
thing on that. When
Hmm.
a lot of the games that advertise are saying to keep your mind young,
Yeah.
is that just an advertisement, or are there really games that keep you fresh? Say,
Yeah. So I think unfortunately most of like the quote unquote brain training, research that they've done, it really doesn't hold up if you're doing the same game all the time. It doesn't really help your brain.
huh?
So, sort of like arranging puzzles and things like that. So, like if you go deep into a repetitive game, so if you're always doing, um, I'm trying to think of an example. sort of games where you connect numbers to shapes and then they disappear. Trying to remember like Candy Crush or that sort of thing, right? Where you're matching shapes and things like that. Um, if you do anything too much, the amount that it helps your brain goes down. I think what does help is if you do a lot of different things. So if you play, so like word games, crosswords can help, but not if you only do crosswords. You know what I mean? A lot of your memory games where you're trying to remember where things are, where like they flip cards and stuff like that, those can help, but not if that's all you're doing.
That's
Um,
fascinating.
yeah, I mean, I think what studies have shown is that the brain, one of the best things for your brain is novelty. So that's always trying new things, always learning or attempting to learn new things, especially as you continue to get older, right? And so, you know, so yes, you know what I mean? Like it does help, but it's certainly not as they advertise. And because like what happens is the brain becomes very good at doing that specialized task, but it doesn't generalize to everything else. So, it's about doing a lot of things a little bit rather than one thing a great deal, I guess is probably the best way to look at it when it comes to those.
Well, I'm thinking about, the research that's been on multitasking.
Right.
And they're saying that's bad, but you're saying we need to multitask our games on, right?
Well, I would say like not so much. I think the distinction I would make, so with multitasking is, at least in my understanding, it's usually defined as doing more than one thing at once, right? So like if we're sitting here talking, it's me having like a YouTube video going on my other monitor in the background, or like writing out stuff. Um, People, I think the studies that I've read at least actually show that people are not good at multitasking. That you sacrifice competence. You know what I mean? The more things you're trying to do at once. And so it's better to, if you're going to sit and read a book, read a book. Don't listen to the radio as you're reading a book, and things like that. But I think what is good and what we do want to develop is the ability to switch tasks quickly. So it's to read a book for 20 minutes and then be able to go outside for a walk, or that's probably not a great example. Let's say to read a book, for 20 minutes and then be able to sit and write in your journal immediately after for 20 minutes, and then to be able to do something else. So it's about focusing nearly 100% on the thing you're doing in the moment, but being able to switch between tasks quickly. You know what I mean? And not waste time. So um and that's where I would say, Loretta, with like gaming and things like that, it's fine to do those brain games, and they are helpful, but it's to not it's to focus on them when you're doing them, but then to be able to move on quickly to something else. You know what I mean? And not get stuck in the rabbit hole of
So,
of pulling down.
so that old advice says when we were kids, we weren't allowed to study and watch TV. Still,
Right.
still,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, like I think there's a very fine line with, I think some studies have shown that music in a certain way, like certainly like classical types of music, instrumental, can sometimes go along with studying and reading and things like that, but that music with words is not helpful. You know what I mean? And I found that in my own work, like just when I do my office work. If I need to focus, because I put together bulletins for, in my other part-time job, I do bulletins for a few churches. So when I really need to focus in on what I'm putting in those documents, if I have music on in the background with words, I can't focus. You know what I mean? On those days where I need to do the thing, I might have instrumental music going in the background, but that's where I have to leave it. You know what I mean? So maybe with music and studying there is some overlap, but in general, you know what I mean? You wouldn't want to be learning something from the music, I guess is where what we want
Right.
to say. You know, yeah,
Okay, so then I guess one of the things we touched on with Vince last week was that nothing is private anymore.
right.
Can you sort of address that? Is that true
Yeah,
or?
It absolutely is, and I think so. Many people, and I apologize if there's anyone here named Karen, but many people know the term Karen now as sort of negative thing, and so that's when people are taking videos of people kind of losing their cool in public situations and having meltdowns and the horrible things that they might say, right? Um, and I mean, some of
What's
these
it
people are
called? It's called Karen?
they call them Karens. So
Okay.
it's sort of the idea of an entire like it showed up in customer service sort of videos where you'd have somebody walk. I mean, and we've all seen this happen. Somebody walks into a McDonald's, there's a mistake made with their order, right? So there's a way most people would handle that, which would be to say, hey, you know what, like you didn't give me French fries, right? And you'd say it to the person, and there'd be some back and forth, but it would be polite, it would be calm, everything would be fine. So um there are videos now of people who kind of just lose their minds, right? Now these people are suffering from something else, right? This is not just people who are feeling emotionally neutral in the moment. You know what I mean? Like they bring a lot of there's something else going on in their life. But the thing is, by the video, you don't know that. You know what I mean? Like all you do is you see this person berating, this, 15-year-old kid who's making, 15, whatever an hour minimum wage doing their job. And like we have a very negative connotation. And there's been cases where people have lost jobs because of this, because they've had such a mental breakdown that they start saying things that are really, I mean, inappropriate without, you know, to be sure. Um, but it's not fair. And I think, on top of it, and probably even more importantly, like younger kids, like I think we all knew anyone who's older than, let's say, 35, right? Really didn't grow up with probably even cell phones. I'm 47, and like I had a cell phone sort of at the end of high school and the beginning of college, but they were really just becoming affordable at that time. Kids can, we all remember as kids growing up that we did dumb things. You know what I mean? Things we kind of cringe at now. And we all know our friends did dumb things. They said dumb things, you know, they did dumb things. And unfortunately for children now, that's on video. You know what I mean? And so they don't have the same benefit of being able to make mistakes in anonymity that we did. And that, that's a really bad thing for child development. You know what I mean? And I think it's one of the biggest struggles that younger children have now is the fact that, some sense of always being watched or potentially always being watched. You know what I mean? Or always, knowing that, yeah, anything you do, you know, can go viral is the term people probably know a lot. There was a kid who made a Star Wars video when the new Star Wars came out. This is probably like 15, 20 years ago. He was in high school and in the audio visual club. So he had access to their cameras and their studio. So he filmed himself pretending to be one of the Jedi, with the lightsabers and stuff. And so he did this for himself. He did not do it to have it publicized. He did not do it to get famous. You know what I mean? He was physically awkward, like he wasn't good at what he was doing. I mean, who is? No one loses a lightsaber, really. Um, you know what I mean? But he was getting into it. It was like sort of like a self-expression thing. You know what I mean? And somehow somebody got a hold of that tape. You know what I mean? And then it went out on the internet. And he became famous, and he's 16, 14, 15, 16, somewhere in there, and he becomes famous for all the wrong reasons. You know what I mean? Because people are making fun of him. And that's the downside of social media. You know what I mean? I know it's one of the things we'll talk about in a little bit, but that lack of anonymity, you know what I mean? The fact, is harmful. You know what I mean? Particularly in the case of kids. You know what I mean? And people who are otherwise disadvantaged, because we make the assumption that when we see them that way, that that's the way they are. You know what I mean? That's kind of why I brought up the Karens. Like we take somebody at their worst moment, we take a video of them, and it goes viral. And then all of a sudden, you know, millions of people are seeing it. And then, it enters into people making, grandiose claims of this, that, and the other thing about the person. And then people taking up social causes because of it. You know what I mean? So, and it's like, you know what? That person had a really bad day. You know what I mean? And they were dealing with some really bad things.
And that's how you have to guide the children that are in your life, right? Because the last thing you want to do is discourage mistakes. Isn't that how we grow up?
That, yes, correct. I mean, I think, a lot of parents struggle with, how to, what is the right balance of technology in their children's life? And it's because the technology didn't exist when they were growing up. Like, I think kids now, so kids who are under the age of 15 will actually raise their own kids when they have them pretty well in terms of technology, because they will have discovered in their own lives through trial and error what's good and what's not good. But until that happens, for people who are trying to raise kids now, it's a difficult thing, because, if your child's, yelling and screaming, as an infant, it's easy to give them an iPad. You know what I mean? And have them sit in front of it and watch videos. It's like the TV question, you know, 50, 60 years ago. You know what I mean? It's the same sort of thing where, the kid's acting up, you put them in front of a TV and they kind of zone out because it's like a drug for their brain. You know what I mean? And they just zone out. And the benefit to the parent is, you know, the child's quiet. So, mom or dad can do whatever it is they need to do, which is sometimes necessary. You know what I mean? It's, but it is difficult, and yes, one of those things is teaching children that anything that you say or do, you know, yeah, can potentially get out there. And that's a really unfortunate thing. And that's a really tough thing to convince a child
Are
of that.
there, Kurt, I'm just wondering, are there rules when when you're hiring an employee? I don't know if you know this, but you're just saying that some people check the social media on an individual. Are they
Sure.
allowed to do that? Is that still
I,
fair? And
well, I mean, so yes, I mean, I think a lot of people do, and they do it more often, probably depending on the type of job that you have. I mean, and one of the big things with social media that's ends up going to court for a lot of people is there's something you say on your private Facebook page, for example, if that reflects negatively on the company or disagrees with your company's values, so to speak, can they fire you? You know what I mean? For bringing, for giving a what they perceive as a bad reputation to them. And so it's a really complicated thing because technology is so pervasive. It's very difficult to draw, you know, to draw the line there. I mean, I know that churches and religious organizations do often and now more than ever have those stipulations, which is to say, if you say something, even if it's private, even if it's on your own personal, let's say we'll use Facebook in this case, even if you say something that's private on your Facebook page, certainly if you identify yourself as an employee of that organization, right? You're already over the line there. The law is clear on that. But even if you take up a position and start to advocate something strongly that goes against their teachings, then yeah, you know what I mean? Like it does have an impact on it can have an impact on your employment or, and it's still should it not? There's issues of free speech and it's tough, you know what I mean? And so this is where this is like us burning the forest down when we discovered fire. We don't yet really know, you know, how to handle the technology that we have yet. You know what I
but we're
mean? So
learning, right?
yes, yeah, we are getting better. You know what I mean? But
Um, Court, I know we have an illustration I'd like to show. Do you want to talk about it? Because I
yes,
thought it
absolutely.
was
Thank
really
you. Yeah,
interesting.
thank you for that. So one of the major, probably one of the most negative aspects of social media in particular is this idea of polarization. So this graph that Loretta's putting up for us. So this was done in 2010, and it was done about Twitter posts. So um, just to be sure that everybody's on the same page of being familiar with it, Twitter is sort of like instant messaging on your phone, but you do it to just anyone who's following you. It's sort of like public. You don't need their individual phone number. You're not communicating with them directly. You're kind of just yelling into the void sort of thing. You know what I mean? It's like you go to your window, open up the window, and just yell something out. That's kind of what Twitter is, right? And whoever hears you hears you. But what ends up happening is that people have started to polarize. So this was done again 2010, so almost 15 years old. And I believe this particular issue, let's say, was gun control. So regardless of how you feel about it, there were people who were for and there were people who were against, right? And what you see in this graph, and this was an actual scientific study, right? So this is done in academic circles, is that people who are like-minded tend to talk to each other only. So all the red people are only talking, or mainly only talking to red people. All the blue people are really only talking to blue people. Those lines that go across in the middle show how much crosstalk there is. But like if you imagine that shape kind of drawing further and further apart, that's kind of what's been happening over the last 15 or 20 years on almost any issue you want to imagine, political, religious, educational, I mean, things, anything. And, because what happens is the more we are surrounded by people who are like-minded, the more radical, in a sense, we become. So I think a good example of it would be, for those of you, I don't have kids, but for those of you who have raised children, who have kids, sometimes you will inevitably find a disagreement with your partner, your husband or wife on one thing or another, right? Where you feel this should happen to the child, they feel the other thing should be happening. What parents, oftentimes who don't have great communication skills will do is they'll end up polarizing each other and they each end up taking more extreme positions than they would normally because they're trying to balance each other, right? So one parent will become overly permissive, the other parent will become overly restrictive, and they get into this weird cycle where they're both trying to balance each other. They both want the child to have a balanced approach to life, but they're so concerned with the way the other parent is acting that they push themselves at more radical. And then the other parent does the same thing. So that's really what, we're seeing in the social media space, right? Is that even, and that's what kind of like self-radicalization is, like in an attempt to balance out, like you see somebody on the other side say something that you regard to be ridiculous. Well, then you're not only are you going to take up a contrary position, but you might go further than you would because you're worried about them swaying what becomes the center ground of the issue, you know? So it's a really troubling thing. And it's something that and so this particular issue is not only a skill that we need to learn, but it's also probably the most important thing to realize about social media in particular. So there's a saying in poker, when you sit down to a poker table, if you can't spot the sucker in a half an hour, then it's you, right?
I didn't
And
know
so
that. That's a good one.
yeah, then you're the sucker, right? And so the same thing goes with social media or with things that are for free, right? If you can't spot the product in 30 minutes, then you're the product. And if we're going to summarize social media, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter, whether it's TikTok, whether it's YouTube, among others, of course, like we are the product. Okay. So we're the thing that's being sold. Okay. And what they're selling us for is ad revenue, right? They want Ford, they want Coke, they want Pepsi to put advertising on their platform because that's how they make money. They don't charge us, but because we engage on their platform, they can sell that to advertisers. They can say, you know what? We have 10 million people every hour that look at our app. You know what I mean? That look at our social media platform. If you put up one ad just for that hour, you're going to hit 10 million people. I mean, and as a business, that's an amazing sort of thing, right? And so in order to drive up their own ad revenue, right? These companies, all social media operates on sort of a similar principle, which is if you search for something, a particular topic, they're going to give you more of that automatically because they believe you're interested in it. An easy way to see this is if you go to YouTube, right? So watch, guarantee you pick something you've never been interested in your life. So like, let's say you look at two videos about gardening, right? And then close your browser, go back to YouTube, and almost immediately, if not an hour or two later, you'll see gardening videos in your list of available videos where they've never been there before, right? The same thing happens with Facebook. If you express an interest in a product or you express an interest in a subject, all of a sudden you're going to see that pop up more and more on that social media thing. And that's because they want to continue to engage you. And they want to continue to engage you because the more time you spend on their platform, the more money they make. You know what I mean? And this is one of the things where I think it's important not to portray these companies as evil. You know what I mean? Like it's yeah, they're not evil in their intentions initially. You know what I mean? They're doing what according to their business ethics is best for their business, which is to make money, continue to exist. But the way in which they do that is to monopolize our attention. And the way they monopolize our attention is to give us more and more of what we want without us even knowing it. You know what I mean? And that's really where we have to that because that feeds polarization because it applies to things that are not just gardening. If you watch a conservative video, you're going to get more conservative videos. And you watch a liberal video, you're going to get more liberal videos. And the thing is over time, if we don't know that that's what's happening, all of a sudden we start thinking, wow, one, everyone agrees with me, right? You know what I mean? There's millions and millions of people that think exactly the same way I do, which robs us of our ability to be exposed to people who disagree with us, or who people who are different than us. And I think one of the things that's most important for our mental, emotional health, psychologically speaking, is to be consistently dealing with people who are not the same. You know what I mean? Who don't think the same, who don't have the same interests, who don't have the same personality. You know what I mean? It's kind of like variety is the spice of life, but variety is also healthy because that's the way the world really is. If you were to walk out into a supermarket, and ask 200 people something, you're going to get a variety of answers, because you have no control over who's there. It's a huge mix of people. Social media is not that, and the tendency is to we have to be aware of that so we don't fall into the trap of thinking, hey, what I mean, this is actually representative of how everybody else in the world is.
So, Kurt, to wrap this up, are we looking at technology as an addiction?
Yes, I mean, it can be. You know what I mean? And so with addiction, um, there's a concept called process addictions, which has been long in place for things like gambling. So, I mean, everyone knows certainly there's a difference between gambling and, cocaine, right? So, they're not entirely the same types of addiction. However, they both can be equally addictive. And technology, social media falls into the process addiction category. Um, and so, what you want to do is there's a couple questions, you want to ask yourself. Do you control the technology that you use or does it control you? You know what I mean? If you want to sit and watch TikTok videos for 10 minutes, can you do it for 10 minutes or do you really get sucked in for half an hour or an hour? Right. So that's the first thing. You want to look at just how much time you're spending on it. You know what I mean? Are other things in your life falling by the wayside because you're watching you're spending too much time on social media. It's the same concept for, for TV. And then I think also importantly, do you find yourself having emotions that are not related to what's going on in your actual life? So this is less a problem. Let's say you watch a video about puppies and kittens, right? Everyone loves them. It's great. You're feeling good. You have positive emotion. That's not so much of a problem, right? But let's say you spend a half an hour or an hour on social media. You put it down. You go to do other things, and you start to notice you're feeling sad or you're feeling stressed. And as you look at your life, you're like, well, there's nothing really going on. Like, where is this emotion coming from? Like no one's life is perfect, right? So we all can, you know, uh, hope for better things, right? But, we might say, well, I don't really have a reason to be sad. You know what I mean? I don't really have a reason to be stressed. So that's a pretty clear indication that your social media technology is having an impact on your emotional state that isn't justified. And then, probably the best thing to do just to kind of gauge yourself is to just go without it. You know what I mean? So for your cell phone, put your cell phone in the other room and don't use it for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. Don't use it for half the day and see how you feel. So if you have anxiety, you know what I mean? If you feel stressed, if you're short with people, you know, and that's the only change you've made to your life, it's a pretty good sign that your technology is using you and you're not using it. You know what I mean? So yes, it absolutely can be addictive.
Boy, that was a wonderful wrap up. Thank you. Because now I'm
Thank
thinking
you.
about that canasta game that I always play on. Um, I'm going to have to switch it up.
Well, it's all about like enjoyment and balance, right? I mean,
Right.
I know Vince talks about this a lot. Life is about balance. Like you can go out and have a high calorie dinner, you know what I mean, and have dessert, you know what I mean, have all the cheesecake you want. You just can't do it every day. You know what I mean? And that's really with technology, it's really the same thing. Do what brings you joy, do what makes you happy. Just don't do it too much.
Well, Court, I cannot thank you enough. This was wonderful. I hope everyone enjoyed it. And Vince will be back next week, and I believe he's continuing on the technology trail, but he's going to talk about 1984. So, Court, thank you. Thank all of you
Absolutely.
for joining us, and I will see you next week.